The comms crackled to life in the dim, grease-stained cockpit of the Defiant, a ship that wasn't supposed to exist. "You're a dead man, human," the voice hissed, sharp and alien, laced with the guttural clicks of the Zarthani enforcer on the other end. "You think we wouldn't notice a warship slipping through the embargo zone? Your species was warned. You were banned." The words hung heavy, like a noose tightening in the air. No response came. Not yet. The captain's fingers danced across the controls, coaxing the ship's engines into a low, rebellious hum. Outside, the void stretched endless and cold, dotted with the flickering lights of Zarthani patrol drones closing in. They'd found him. Of course they had. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, and let a slow, bitter smile tug at his lips. Banned, huh? The galaxy's high and mighty council had sat in their shimmering towers a decade ago, decreeing that humanity, too reckless, too defiant, too human, couldn't be trusted with warships. No more battle fleets, no more cannons roaring in the dark. "Strip them down," they'd said. "Leave them with cargo haulers and meek little survey ships. Keep them in line." He remembered the broadcasts, the smug faces of the council's alien overlords as they handed down the edict. He'd been a kid then, watching his father, a shipwright with hands like steel and a heart full of fire, smash a bottle of cheap whiskey against the wall and swear he'd never bow. 10 years. 10 years of watching humanity choke under the embargo, scraping by while the Zarthani and their ilk strutted across the stars, their sleek dreadnoughts casting shadows over human colonies. 10 years of whispered rumors in backwater bars, rumors of rogue shipyards, of men and women who wouldn't kneel. He'd tracked those whispers like a bloodhound, from the asteroid belts of Tau Ceti to the rusted docks of New Haven. And now here he was, aboard the Defiant, a ship born in secret, its hull forged from stolen alloys and human spite. They'd done it anyway. Damn the ban! Damn the council! Damn them all! "Captain!" The shout jolted him back. It was his second in command, her voice raw as she stumbled into the cockpit, her dark hair plastered with sweat. "Drones are locking weapons. 3 minutes tops before they're in range. We've got no shields yet. R&D didn't finish the grid before we had to bolt." Her eyes, wide and fierce, met his. She didn't say it, but he heard it anyway. "We're screwed." He exhaled through his nose, the sound sharp and deliberate. "Then we don't let them get close. Fire up the thrusters. Full burn." She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, and he saw the flicker of doubt in her. The Defiant wasn't ready. Not really. It was a patchwork beast, its guns untested, its hull barely holding against the stress of a hard run. But they'd known that when they stole it from the yard, when they'd gunned the engines and torn out of orbit with Zarthani alarms screaming behind them. No turning back now. "You sure?" she asked, voice low like she was testing him. He didn't blink. "I didn't build this thing to die quiet. Move!" She nodded once, sharp, and bolted back to the engine bay. The deck shuddered as the thrusters roared to life, a deep, guttural howl that rattled his bones. The Defiant surged forward, cutting through the black like a blade through flesh. On the view screen, the drones adjusted course, their red targeting lights pulsing faster. They weren't letting go. He gripped the controls, his knuckles white. He could still hear his father's voice, slurring through that broken night a decade ago. "They think they can chain us, boy. Think they can take the stars from us. But we're humans. We don't bend. We break 'em." The old man had died 2 years later, worked to death in a council-run scrapyard, dismantling the last of humanity's proud fleet. The captain had sworn then, sworn on blood and ash, that he'd see that fire burn again. The Defiant was his answer, his middle finger to the galaxy. But answers came with a price. The comms crackled again. "Last chance, human. the Zarthani snarled. "Surrender or we reduce you to dust." He thumbed the mic, his voice steady as stone. "Come and try." He cut the line, and the silence that followed was louder than the engines. The drones were closing. The fight was coming. And deep down, in the pit of his gut, he knew. This was just the beginning. The Defiant screamed through the void, its engines burning hotter than they were ever meant to. The captain's hand stayed locked on the controls, his jaw tight as the ship bucked beneath him. Every shudder of the hull was a reminder. This beast wasn't polished, wasn't perfect. It was a rebel's dream hammered together in the shadows, and now it was being tested in fire. The viewscreen flared with warnings. The Zarthani drones were gaining, their sleek, needle-like forms cutting through space with a precision humans hadn't matched in a decade. Not since the Council stripped them bare. Not since the ban. "Thrusters at 110%, his second-in-command shouted from the engine bay, her voice crackling over the intercom. "We're pushing redline, any more and we'll blow a core." Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he didn't wipe it away. He could feel the heat bleeding through the deck, the ship groaning like a wounded animal. He didn't care. They weren't outrunning the drones to survive. They were doing it to prove a point. The galaxy thought humans were finished, neutered by rules and threats. They were wrong. A sharp beep cut through the noise. Target lock. The drones had range now, their weapons hot. "Brace!" he barked, yanking the controls hard to starboard. The Defiant lurched, a clumsy dodge for a ship this size, but it was enough. A streak of plasma scorched past, missing the hull by meters, lighting up the cockpit in a sickly green glow. His stomach twisted, not from fear, but from fury. Those bastards wanted him dead, wanted this ship, his ship, turned to slag. They'd get their chance, but not yet. "Guns online?" he called, voice rough as gravel. A pause, then her reply. "Half charged." Targeting's glitchy. Aim's manual. He cursed under his breath. Manual, of course. The weapons team back at the Rogue Yard had begged for more time, more resources, but time ran out when the Zarthani raided the system. They'd barely gotten the Defiant spaceborne, its cannons still a mess of jury-rigged circuits and hope. Didn't matter. "Get someone on it," he snapped. "I want a shot." Footsteps pounded behind him as a crewman stumbled in, lanky and pale, his hands trembling as he slid into the gunner's seat. "Never fired one of these," he muttered, voice shaking. The captain didn't look at him. "First time for everything. Line it up." The kid swallowed hard, fingers fumbling over the controls. On the viewscreen, the drones fanned out, 3 of them now, their movements synchronized like a predator pack. They weren't just machines. They were the Council's will made metal, sent to crush what humans dared to dream. The ship jolted again. Another near miss. The captain's mind raced, replaying every scrap of memory from his father's stories. The old man had been a gunner once, back when humanity's fleets ruled the lanes. "Hit 'em where they don't expect," he'd said, voice thick with liquor and pride. "They think we're predictable. Prove 'em wrong." The captain's eyes narrowed. The drones were fast, but they relied on patterns, on logic. Humans didn't. "Hold fire," he said, voice low. The gunner froze, confused. "What?" "Just hold." He jerked the controls again, sending the Defiant into a wild spiral. The crew cursed as they slammed against their harnesses, but he ignored them. The drones adjusted, closing tighter, their targeting systems recalibrating. He waited, counting the seconds, feeling the rhythm of their pursuit. Then, now. "Port side, lead drone, fire!" The cannon roared, a ragged burst of light that tore through the dark. The shot was sloppy, off-center, but it hit. The lead drone erupted in a silent fireball, debris spinning into the void. The other 2 broke formation, caught off guard. A cheer went up from the crew, raw and desperate, but the captain didn't join in. 1 down, 2 to go. And behind those drones he knew was something worse. A Zarthani cruiser, lurking just out of sensor range, waiting to finish what its pets started. "Keep moving," he growled, pushing the throttle harder. The engines screamed in protest, but they held. His second-in-command burst back into the cockpit, her face streaked with grime. "We can't sustain this. Hull's cracking." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Then we make it count." She stared at him, then nodded, a flicker of something, respect, maybe, crossing her face before she ran back to her post. The comms lit up again, that same alien voice, colder now. "You think 1 kill changes anything, human? You're a spark in a storm. We'll bury you." The captain didn't answer. He didn't need to. The Defiant was alive, fighting, defying. That was enough, for now. But deep down, he felt it. The storm was coming, and it wouldn't stop with drones. The Defiant tore through the black, a wounded beast leaving a trail of sparks and leaking coolant. The captain's hands ached from gripping the controls, his eyes burning as he tracked the 2 remaining drones on the view screen. They'd regrouped, smarter now, weaving tighter patterns to box him in. The trick with the spiral had bought time, but not much. The ship's hull creaked under the strain, every jolt a reminder that this wasn't a warship fresh off some gleaming assembly line. It was a rogue's gamble, built by hands that refused to quit. And it was starting to show. "Damage report," he barked, voice cutting through the cockpit's din. His second-in-command stumbled back in, her breath ragged, a datapad clutched in her grimy hands. "Port thrusters at 60%. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4. Sealed for now, but they won't hold under fire. Guns are overheating. We've got maybe 2 shots left before they fry." She looked at him, her gaze hard but fraying at the edges. "We're bleeding out here." He didn't flinch. "Then we bleed loud. Get the crew to reinforce those seals." She hesitated, lips parting like she wanted to argue, but the set of his jaw stopped her. She turned and bolted, shouting orders down the corridor. He could hear the crew scrambling, boots on metal, curses flying, the clatter of tools against patched-up plating. They weren't soldiers, not really. Half of them were mechanics, smugglers, outcasts who'd signed on because they had nowhere else to go. The other half were dreamers, kids raised on stories of humanity's lost glory. He'd dragged them all into this, and now they were fighting for their lives. No regrets, not yet. A flash on the view screen snapped his focus back. The drones were closing, their weapons charging again. He cursed, wrenching the ship into a hard dive. The Defiant groaned, a deep, mournful sound, but it obeyed. Plasma streaked past, close enough to rattle the hull. "Too close." "Gunner," he shouted. The lanky kid was still at the cannon, sweat soaking his shirt. "Ready," came the shaky reply. "Take the one on the left, now." Another burst of light ripped from the barrel, wild and unrefined. It grazed the drone, shearing off a wing. The machine spun out, damaged but not dead, trailing smoke as it fell behind. One left. Before he could savor it, the sensors screamed. A new signature, massive, emerging from the edge of the system. His gut sank. The Zarthani cruiser. It loomed into view, a jagged silhouette of black and gold, its cannons glinting like teeth. The drones were just the hounds. This was the hunter. The comms crackled, that same alien voice now thick with triumph. "You've amused us long enough, human. Your little toy ends here." The captain's blood boiled. Toy? He'd poured everything into this ship, every ounce of rage, every memory of his father's broken hands, every night spent plotting revenge against a galaxy that thought humans were done. This wasn't a toy. It was a promise. "Full power to engines," he growled, slamming the throttle forward. The Defiant lurched, its frame shuddering as the last of its strength poured into a desperate sprint. The cruiser fired, a lance of energy that tore through space, missing by a hair as he twisted the ship aside. The crew screamed, thrown against their stations, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. "Head for the nebula," he ordered, pointing to a swirling cloud of gas and dust on the sensors. It was a long shot. Radiation would scramble their systems, maybe hide them, but it was all they had. His second-in-command burst back in, eyes wide. "The nebula, that'll cook us alive!" He didn't look at her. "Better than dying out here. Move!" She gritted her teeth and ran, relaying the plan. The ship barreled toward the cloud, the cruiser's next shot grazing the hull, blasting a chunk of plating into the void. Alarms wailed, red lights bathing the cockpit. The drone, still alive, fired too, a weaker hit that punched through the starboard side. He felt the impact in his chest, like the ship was part of him, bleeding with every blow. The nebula loomed closer, its edges glowing with an eerie violet haze. The cruiser slowed, wary of the chaos within, but the drone didn't. It followed, relentless, its targeting locked. "One shot left," the gunner rasped, hands trembling on the controls. "Make it count," the captain said, voice steady despite the chaos. The cannon fired, a final desperate roar. The drone vanished in a burst of flame, and then the Defiant plunged into the nebula, swallowed by the storm. Silence fell, broken only by the ship's dying groans. They were alive, for now. But the hunter was still out there, and it wouldn't stop. The Defiant drifted in the nebula's embrace, a ghost ship shrouded in violet mist. The engines had fallen silent, their roar replaced by a faint, ominous whine as the last of their power bled away. The captain stood motionless in the cockpit, his hands still on the controls, though there was nothing left to steer. The viewscreen was a mess of static, the nebula's radiation frying the sensors, painting the world outside in flickers of noise and shadow. Somewhere out there, the Zarthani cruiser waited. Patient, predatory, knowing its prey couldn't run forever. He could feel its presence like a weight on his chest, a promise of ruin. Inside, the ship was a graveyard of sound. Creaks and groans from the battered hull, the hiss of leaking pipes, the ragged breathing of a crew pushed past their limits. His second-in-command slumped against the wall, her face smeared with soot, one hand pressed to a cut above her eye. "We're blind," she said, voice hoarse. "Sensors are down, comms are scrambled. If they find us in here—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. He knew what came next. Annihilation, swift and merciless. The Defiant had defied the odds too long, and the galaxy didn't forgive miracles. He turned from the controls, his boots heavy on the deck. "Then we don't let them find us. Get the crew to kill the power, everything. Lights, life support, all of it. We go dark." Her eyes widened, a spark of disbelief cutting through her exhaustion. "Dark? We'll freeze in an hour. Oxygen'll run out in 2. He met her gaze, unyielding. "Better than a plasma round through the hull. Do it." She stared at him, then gave a sharp nod and pushed off the wall, disappearing into the flickering corridors. He heard her voice echo, barking orders, and one by one, the ship's systems died. The hum of the vents faded. The dim glow of panels winked out. Darkness swallowed them whole. The cold came fast, seeping through the walls, curling around his fingers as he stood watch. His breath fogged in the faint light of the emergency console, the only thing still alive, its glow barely enough to see by. The crew huddled in the shadows, their faces pale and drawn, eyes reflecting a mix of fear and stubborn fire. The gunner, still shaking from his last shot, clutched a wrench like it was a lifeline. A mechanic muttered curses under her breath, patching a sparking conduit with trembling hands. They were breaking, but they weren't broken. Not yet. He let his mind drift, just for a moment, back to the rogue yard where this all began. He'd stood among the skeletal frames of half-built ships, the air thick with welled smoke and defiance. The shipwrights, old hands like his father, young blood with nothing to lose, had poured their souls into the Defiant. They'd known the risks, known the Council would hunt them down. "We're not building a ship," one had said, voice rough with years of grit. "We're building a middle finger to the stars." He'd laughed then, a rare sound. Now that memory burned in his chest, a coal keeping him warm as the cold tightened its grip. A faint ping broke the silence, the emergency console. He leaned in, squinting at the grainy data, a shadow on the edge of the nebula, moving slow. The cruiser. It hadn't given up. It was probing, scanning, waiting for a blip of heat or power to betray them. His pulse quickened, but he forced it down. "Stay quiet," he whispered to the crew, voice low and steady. "They don't know we're here." They nodded, breath held, as if sound alone could doom them. Minutes stretched into eternity, the cold sinking deeper, numbing his hands, frosting the deck. Then a jolt. The ship rocked, a dull thud echoing through the hull. His second-in-command staggered back in, her face tight with panic. "Debris," she hissed. "Nebula's full of it. Rocks, old wrecks. We're drifting right into it." Another thud, sharper, and a crack split the air. A panel buckling somewhere below. The captain's jaw clenched. Hide from the cruiser and the nebula would tear them apart. Fight, and they'd be ash in seconds. No good choices, just human ones. He straightened, decision made. "Power up, minimum. Engines only. We're not dying like rats in a trap." She stared at him, then grinned, a feral edge to it. "Aye, Captain." The crew moved, sluggish but alive, as the Defiant hummed back to life. The cruiser would see them now. Game on. But humans didn't go quiet. They went loud. The Defiant shuddered as its engines sputtered awake, a low growl cutting through the nebula's oppressive silence. The captain stood at the helm, his hands steady on the controls despite the ice in his veins. Not from the cold, but from the certainty of what came next. The emergency console flickered, its weak light casting jagged shadows across the cockpit. The crew moved like ghosts in the dark, their breaths visible in the frigid air, hands fumbling to coax life back into the dying ship. They knew the risk. Power meant detection. Detection meant the cruiser. And the cruiser meant death, or a fight they couldn't win. Yet. "Engines at 20%, his second-in-command rasped, her voice tight as she leaned over a cracked display. "Enough to maneuver, not much else. Hull's holding, barely." She glanced at him, her eyes sharp with a question she didn't ask. "What now?" He didn't answer with words. His fingers tightened on the throttle, easing the ship forward through the nebula's swirling haze. The deck vibrated beneath his boots, a fragile pulse of defiance against the void. Every second they stayed alive was a spit in the Council's face. A dull clang rang out, another chunk of debris glancing off the hull. The nebula was a minefield, littered with the bones of forgotten ships, and the Defiant was limping right through it. The captain adjusted course, weaving past a spinning shard of metal that glinted in the console's glow. The cruiser was out there, its sensors sweeping, and he could almost feel its alien commander. Cold, calculating, savoring the hunt. The Zarthani didn't rush. They didn't need to. They'd crushed humanity's fleets before, turned proud armadas to dust under the Council's banner. One rogue ship? To them, it was a gnat buzzing too close to the flame. "Contact!" the gunner shouted, voice cracking as he pointed at the console. A blip, sharp, deliberate, moving through the static. The cruiser had found them. The captain's gut twisted, but his face stayed stone. "Distance?" he demanded. "Close, too close," his second-in-command answered, her fingers flying over the controls. "They're at the nebula's edge, locking weapons. We've got minutes." Minutes. Not enough to run, not enough to hide, just enough to fight. He turned to the crew, their faces pale but fierce in the dim light. "You all knew this might happen," he said, voice low but carrying. "We built this ship to prove something. To them, to ourselves. They think we're beaten. They think we'll roll over. But we're humans. We don't beg. We bite." A murmur rippled through them, a spark catching fire. The gunner gripped his station, knuckles white. A mechanic slammed a fist against the wall, nodding. His second-in-command met his gaze and smirked, a wild edge to it. "Let's bite hard," she said. "Full power to engines," he ordered. "Guns, too, whatever's left. We're not waiting for them to come to us." The ship groaned as energy surged through its veins, the hull trembling under the strain. The viewscreen cleared just enough to show the cruiser emerging from the nebula's rim, a monster of sleek curves and glowing ports, its cannons charging with a sickly yellow light. It dwarfed the Defiant, a god facing a mortal. But gods bled too if you hit them right. "Target their weapons array," he snapped at the gunner. "One shot, make it hurt." The kid nodded, sweat beading on his brow as he wrestled with the manual controls. The Defiant surged forward, no longer hiding, its engines roaring defiance. The cruiser fired first, a beam of energy that sliced through the nebula, clipping the ship's flank. The deck bucked, throwing the crew to their knees, sparks raining from a busted panel. "Hold it together!" the captain roared, righting the ship with a brutal yank of the controls. The gunner fired back, a single ragged blast from the Defiant's cannon. It streaked through the haze, wild and unguided, but it hit. The cruiser's weapons array erupted in a bloom of fire, one cannon going dark. A cheer erupted, hoarse and triumphant, but it died fast. The cruiser retaliated, a volley of smaller shots peppering the Defiant's hull. Metal screamed, air hissed from new breaches, and the captain felt the ship falter beneath him. They'd drawn blood, but they were bleeding worse. "Keep moving," he shouted, pushing the engines past their limit. The cruiser loomed closer, its remaining guns tracking them. The nebula wouldn't save them now. This was it. The line between survival and oblivion, and he'd be damned if he crossed it quietly. The Defiant was dying. The captain knew it in his bones, felt it in the way the ship trembled beneath him, its hull splintering like brittle glass. The cockpit was a chaos of smoke and flashing red, alarms blaring, panels sparking, the air thick with the stench of burnt wiring. The viewscreen flickered, showing the Tsar Thani cruiser bearing down, its remaining cannons glowing hot despite the wound they'd carved into its flank. The Defiant had struck first blood, but the beast wasn't slowing. It was angry now, and that made it deadlier. "Engines at 10%, his second-in-command shouted, her voice raw over the screech of tearing metal. She clung to a console, one arm braced against the wall as the ship rocked from another hit. "We've lost starboard thrusters, maneuvering's shot, hull breaches on every deck." Her eyes locked with his, wild and searching. "We can't take another volley." He didn't answer, not with words. His hands stayed on the controls, wrestling the ship into a shaky turn, buying seconds they didn't have. The crew scrambled behind him, patching leaks, rerouting power, fighting to keep the Defiant alive. They were out of miracles, but they weren't out of fight. A plasma bolt slammed into the rear, the impact throwing him forward against the console. Pain flared in his chest, but he gritted his teeth and held on. The gunner sprawled across his station, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, but he dragged himself back up, cursing. "Cannon's dead, no power left," he yelled. The captain's jaw tightened. No guns, no speed, no shields, just a battered shell and a crew that wouldn't quit. The cruiser loomed closer, filling the view screen, its silhouette a promise of extinction. The comms crackled, that alien voice cutting through the noise, smooth, mocking, venomous. You fought well, human, for a dead species. Surrender now and we'll grant you a quick end. Resist, and we'll peel your little ship apart piece by piece. The captain's lip curled, a snarl born of years of rage. Surrender. He'd watched his father waste away under the council's boot, seen colonies starve while Zarthani fleets patrolled the skies. Surrender wasn't in his blood. It wasn't in any of theirs. Shut it off, he growled, and his second-in-command killed the comms with a flick of her hand. Silence fell, heavy and defiant. He turned to the crew, their faces gaunt but burning with the same fire he felt. They think we're done, he said, voice steady despite the chaos. They think we'll beg. But this ship, this fight, it's not about winning. It's about showing them we're still here. We're still human. Ideas? He wasn't asking for hope. He was asking for teeth. The mechanic piped up, her voice rough but fierce. Ram them. A beat of stunned silence. Then the gunner laughed, a short, jagged sound. She's serious. Take out their bridge, maybe cripple them. His second-in-command stepped closer, her expression grim but alive. Engines might hold for one last burn, straight shot. They won't expect it. Too crazy, even for us. The captain's eyes narrowed, mind racing. Ramming a cruiser 10 times their size? Suicide. But suicide with a purpose, a final bloody mark on the galaxy's face. He nodded once, sharp. Do it. Full power, whatever's left. Aim for their command deck. The crew didn't hesitate. They moved, frantic, focused, alive, as the Defiant's engines coughed and roared one last time. The ship lurched forward, picking up speed, a wounded animal charging its hunter. The cruiser fired again, a glancing blow that ripped through the port side, but it didn't stop them. The captain gripped the controls, steering through the pain, the smoke, the screams of the hull giving way. On the view screen, the cruiser grew massive, its bridge a gleaming target. The Zarthani must have realized too late. Their shots went wild, panicked. The captain's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. His father's voice echoed in his skull. We don't bend. We break 'em. This was breaking them, all right? Breaking everything. The crew braced, some shouting, some silent, all in it together. The Defiant closed the gap, a spear aimed at the heart of the enemy. Impact in 10 seconds. 9, 8. Then, a flash. Not from the cruiser, but from the side. A new signature on the dying sensors. Human. Another ship. Small, fast, armed. A voice burst through the static, rough and urgent. Hold off, you crazy bastards! We've got your back! The captain froze, disbelief warring with the fire in his gut. They weren't alone. The Defiant hung on the edge of oblivion, its hull a mangled wreck, engines howling as they burned through their last reserves. The captain's hands locked on the controls, his breath ragged, every muscle coiled for the collision that would end it all. The Zarthani cruiser filled the view screen, its bridge a gleaming bullseye, seconds away from impact. The crew braced, some cursing, some praying, all ready to carve their defiance into the enemy's flesh. Then that voice had crackled through the static, rough and human. Hold off, you crazy bastards! We've got your back! A new ship, small, jagged, unmistakably human, streaked into view, guns blazing. The captain yanked the controls hard, aborting the ram at the last second. The Defiant veered, shuddering as it scraped past the cruiser's hull, metal screeching against metal. Sparks flew, the ship bucking wildly, but it held, just barely. The newcomer fired a salvo, crude but fierce, slamming into the cruiser's side. Explosions bloomed, tearing through its armor, and the massive ship faltered, its cannons falling silent for a heartbeat. The captain's chest heaved, disbelief warring with a surge of raw, feral hope. They weren't alone. Humanity hadn't folded. "Identify!" his second-in-command shouted, staggering to the comms console, her voice sharp over the chaos. The reply came fast, laced with grit and pride. "Renegade, out of Tau Ceti. Heard you were stirring trouble. Couldn't let you hog the fun." Another burst of fire lit the void as the Renegade danced around the cruiser, a scrappy fighter punching above its weight. The captain's lips twitched, a grin hard and wild. Tau Ceti. The rumors had been true. More rogue yards, more ships, more humans who'd said to hell with the ban. The Defiant wasn't a lone spark. It was a fuse. "Engines?" he demanded, turning to his second-in-command. She checked the readings, wincing. 5%. We're coasting on fumes." He nodded, eyes back on the view screen. The cruiser was recovering, its remaining guns swiveling toward the Renegade. The little ship was fast, but it wouldn't last long against that beast. The Defiant was a wreck, its guns dead, its hull leaking air, but it still had mass. It still had teeth. "One more run," he said, voice low and final. "We hit their engines. Give the Renegade a chance." The crew didn't argue. They knew what it meant. Knew this was the end game. The mechanic tightened a strap on her harness, muttering, "Let's make it loud." The gunner, blood streaking his face, gave a shaky thumbs up. His second-in-command met his gaze, steady despite the exhaustion carving lines into her face. "Full burn?" she asked. He nodded. "Full burn." She slammed the controls, and the Defiant lurched forward, its dying engines screaming one last time. The ship gained speed, a broken arrow aimed at the cruiser's glowing thrusters. The Tsar Thani saw it coming. Plasma bolts streaked toward them, one punching through the cockpit's edge, shattering the view screen. Glass and air exploded outward, sucking at the crew, but they held on, strapped in, roaring defiance. The captain kept his hands on the helm, steering blind, feeling the ship's pulse through the deck. The Renegade fired again, drawing the cruiser's attention, buying them seconds. It was enough. Impact. The Defiant slammed into the cruiser's engines, a thunderous crash that shook the stars. Metal crumpled, fire erupted, and the massive ship's thrusters went dark, its bulk spinning helplessly in the void. The Defiant bounced off, a wreck of twisted steel tumbling through space. Inside, silence fell. Alarms dead, systems gone, only the sound of ragged breathing. The captain slumped in his chair, vision blurring but alive. They all were, somehow. The comms flickered, the Renegade's voice cutting through. "You insane sons of bitches, you did it! Cruiser's crippled! We're coming for you!" The captain exhaled, a rough laugh breaking free. His father's words echoed. "We don't bend. We break 'em." They'd broken them, all right. Not just the cruiser, but the lie. That humans were finished. That the ban had won. Outside, the nebula glowed, the Renegade closing in to pull survivors from the wreckage. The captain looked at his crew, battered, bleeding, unbroken, and saw the truth. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The galaxy would hear about the Defiant, about the humans who'd built a warship in the dark and fought with it in the light. More would come. More ships, more fire, more defiance. The Council thought they'd chained humanity. They'd just lit the match. The universe had long dismissed humanity as an insignificant race, too fragmented and reckless to pose any real threat. The Galactic Council barely acknowledged Earth's existence, allowing it to linger on the fringes of space, seen as a backwater planet with no strategic value. But everything changed when the Krell Dominion arrived. The Krell were warlords of the void, their conquests spanning thousands of systems. They moved like a plague, consuming planets, enslaving civilizations and razing anything that resisted. Their eyes turned to Earth, expecting an easy victory. Humanity, after all, had spent most of its history fighting itself. But the Krell weren't prepared for the unexpected. When the invasion began, Earth's defenses crumbled within weeks. The United Nations Space Force fought valiantly, but was outmatched. Major cities fell, nations surrendered, and the Krell's banners rose over once proud human strongholds. The last remnants of Earth's military retreated underground, scattered and desperate. And then, against all odds, the tides turned, not by soldiers, not by generals, but by those whom Earth had once cast aside. The traitors. They were the outcasts, the exiles, the condemned. Once labeled as criminals, rebels, and deserters, they had fled Earth years ago to the outer rim of the galaxy, finding refuge in lawless systems. They had turned to piracy, smuggling, and mercenary work. The Galactic Council despised them, and Earth had long considered them disgraces. But they were still human. The moment Earth fell, the exiles received the news. Among them was Captain Elias Rourke, a former fleet commander sentenced to death for leading an unsanctioned attack against an alien dignitary. He had spent the last decade running guns for rogue factions, but when he saw the Krell banners over New York, something in him snapped. Earth was his home, and no matter how much it had rejected him, he wouldn't let it burn. Rourke wasn't the only one. Across the galaxy, other outcasts, hackers, warlords, rogue AI specialists, and battle-hardened mercenaries watched in fury as the Krell turned their birthplace into a graveyard. They weren't heroes. They weren't loyal citizens. But they were human, and that was enough. They began to strike in the only way they knew. Dirty. The first attack came in the form of sabotage. The Krell's supply chains started failing. Their weapons malfunctioned mid-battle. Vital intelligence was leaked to the Resistance. Ships exploded in dry docks, and high-ranking Krell officers were found dead in their chambers, throats slit by unseen hands. Then came the open war. A fleet of ships, patched together from stolen vessels and black market tech, emerged from the darkness of space. They had no flags, no official allegiance, only a single message broadcast to every remaining human resistance cell. We are still here, and we are not done. They struck hard and fast. Rourke's fleet, the so-called Ghost Armada, operated outside the rules of engagement. They didn't fight fair. They hacked into the Krell's systems, turned their own war machines against them, and used asteroid fields as deadly ambush points. They played dirty, because war was never meant to be noble. The Krell, for all their might, weren't prepared for an enemy who had already lived in the shadows. They weren't ready for a force that didn't play by the rules, that knew the back alleys of the galaxy better than they did. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't fighting itself. It wasn't divided by borders, politics, or ideologies. The outcasts, the rebels, the abandoned, they had become Earth's saviors, fighting for a world that had once turned its back on them. The war was far from over. The Krell were still powerful, their forces vast. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and humanity never forgot its grudges. The Krell didn't understand what was happening. Their war doctrine was built on overwhelming force, sweeping invasions, planetary bombardments, and swift subjugation. But against these human insurgents, their usual tactics were useless. The Ghost Armada wasn't an organized military. It was a network of outlaws, criminals, and exiles who had spent their lives surviving in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The first major blow came at the Battle of Titan's Shadow. Rourke had intercepted a Krell transmission revealing an incoming reinforcement fleet. The Dominion was sending 3 dreadnoughts, massive warships that could level entire cities with orbital strikes. If they reached Earth's occupied space, It would crush what little resistance remained. Rourke had no fleet that could match them in open combat. He had stolen warships, barely functioning battlecruisers, and a handful of fighters. Nothing that could go toe-to-toe with the Krell's might. But he wasn't planning on fighting fair. His plan was insane. The Ghost Armada planted false intel, feeding the Krell an illusion of a retreating human fleet in the debris field of Titan's Shadow, a region littered with the wreckage of forgotten battles. The Krell, arrogant in their superiority, took the bait and entered the field at full speed, eager to crush the scattered remains of humanity's so-called saviors. That's when the trap was sprung. Hidden within the wreckage were scavenged nuclear warheads, repurposed mining explosives, and a network of remotely piloted freighters, all rigged to detonate at Rourke's command. The moment the Krell dreadnoughts crossed the threshold, the stars lit up in a violent explosion. 2 of the 3 massive warships were instantly obliterated, their hulls torn apart by a cascade of detonations. The third, severely damaged and attempting to flee, was swarmed by the Ghost Armada's ships. They weren't standard military vessels, but retrofitted pirate ships, cargo haulers turned into attack craft, and old Earth frigates equipped with black market weaponry. They moved with a vicious unpredictability, slicing through the remaining Krell forces with brutal efficiency. Rourke personally led the final assault, piloting his aging but deadly strike cruiser, the Red Reaper, as it punched through the wounded dreadnought's defenses. His boarding team, consisting of former bounty hunters, cybernetic mercenaries, and assassins, stormed the command deck, cutting down the Krell officers with ruthless precision. By the time the last Krell commander fell, Rourke stood over his corpse and sent a single message to the rest of the Dominion. "The hunted have become the hunters. We are coming for you." Across the galaxy, the message spread like wildfire. Humanity, once dismissed as fractured and weak, had just taken down 3 of the Krell's strongest warships. It wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration of war. The Galactic Council, which had refused to intervene during Earth's fall, now watched with uneasy fascination. They had assumed humanity would crumble, that the Krell would be unchallenged. But now? Now the outcasts, the exiled, the so-called traitors, were leading a rebellion that was turning the tides. And for the first time, the Krell hesitated. Rourke knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion wouldn't retreat, not yet. They were wounded, but a wounded predator was even more dangerous. The next battle wouldn't be as easy, but that was fine, because for the first time in history, humanity wasn't fighting itself. They were fighting together. The Krell responded with fury. Within days of their devastating loss at Titan's Shadow, they launched a brutal counteroffensive. They targeted human colonies in the outer systems, burning settlements to the ground and massacring civilians in a show of force. Their message was clear: resistance would be met with annihilation. But humanity had already passed the point of fear. For every colony the Krell destroyed, another rose up in defiance. The Ghost Armada's victories had sparked something Earth had lost long ago: unity. Underground resistance cells, scattered survivors, and even some remnants of the old Earth military began coordinating with Rourke's forces. Smugglers who once worked only for credits now ran weapons to the rebellion. Black market engineers designed war machines from salvaged Krell tech. Scientists who had fled Earth before the invasion now returned, bringing with them stolen alien schematics. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about vengeance. Rourke didn't waste time. He knew the Krell would strike hard, but they still underestimated humanity's resourcefulness. The next phase of the war wouldn't be about brute force. It would be about unraveling the Dominion from within. They needed to hit something bigger than just warships. They needed to shatter the Krell's war machine. The answer came from an unlikely source: Verana Kale, a former intelligence operative who had once worked for the Galactic Council before being branded a traitor for exposing their corruption. She had spent years in exile, building her own network of informants and spies. When she joined the rebellion, she brought something priceless: knowledge. The Krell aren't invincible, she explained in a war council aboard Rourke's flagship. A holographic projection of the Dominion's supply routes flickered before them. They rely on centralized command hubs to coordinate their forces. Cut off their information flow, and they'll stumble. Disrupt their supply chains, and their forces will starve. Her target was Corthan Prime, a heavily fortified logistics station that controlled nearly half of the Krell's supply network in the sector. If it fell, the Dominion's war effort would grind to a halt. But taking it wouldn't be easy. It was guarded by planetary shields, orbital defenses, and a full fleet of Krell warships. A direct assault would be suicide. Rourke smirked. Good thing we don't fight fair. The plan was bold. Coyle's network infiltrated Corthan Prime weeks before the attack, planting false orders in the Dominion's communication lines. The Krell believed the station was under threat from a rival alien faction, so they redirected a significant portion of their fleet elsewhere. Meanwhile, the Ghost Armada used a stolen Krell freighter to slip past the outer defenses. Posing as a damaged supply ship, they were allowed to dock inside the station. The moment they touched down, the real battle began. Rourke led the assault team, storming through Corthan Prime's corridors with a mix of human rebels, exiled soldiers, and cybernetically enhanced mercenaries. The Krell were caught off guard. Half their security forces had been reassigned based on the false intelligence. Within hours, they reached the station's control center. Kyle hacked into the systems, rerouting supply shipments to human-controlled sectors and shutting down Dominion communications across the entire region. But just as victory seemed certain, the Krell's trap was revealed. A hidden reinforcement fleet emerged from hyperspace, one of the Dominion's elite war divisions, led by High Warlord Vesic himself. Unlike the other Krell commanders, Vesic had studied humanity's resistance. He had learned from their victories, and he had come prepared. The orbital bombardment began instantly. The shields protecting Corthan Prime were still active, but it wouldn't be long before they failed. The rebels were now trapped inside, with no way out. This was never going to be easy, Rourke muttered, gripping his rifle as the alarm sirens blared. Cale's fingers flew across the control panel. I might have an idea, but you're not going to like it. She pointed to a hidden override command, one that would detonate the station's core. It would destroy Corthan Prime, the supply networks, and every Krell ship in range, but it would also leave them stranded in deep space with no way home. Rourke exhaled. We've survived worse. With a single command, Cale activated the countdown. The battle wasn't over yet. The station trembled as the countdown began. Red warning lights flashed across the control center, and automated alarms blared in a language that wasn't meant for human ears. The Krell outside didn't realize what was happening. Yet. But the moment they did, all hell would break loose. We've got 5 minutes before this place goes up, Kyle said, her voice sharp with urgency. We need an exit, now. Rourke's mind raced. The Ghost Armada's main ships were light years away, hiding in deep space. Their stolen freighter was useless. It had already been blasted apart in the firefight. The only way out was through the Krell warships in orbit. He tapped his comm. Valka, tell me you've got something? Valka was an ex-pirate-turned-ace pilot, infamous across the Outer Rim for hijacking enemy vessels. She had slipped into Corthan Prime with the rest of the strike team, but her mission had been different. Find a ride. Her voice crackled over the comm. I'm sitting in the hangar base staring at a fully operational Krell destroyer. Think you can get here before I get bored? Rourke grinned. On our way. The team moved fast, cutting down Krell soldiers as they fought their way through the station's winding corridors. The enemy was in chaos. Some were still following their normal security protocols, unaware that the entire station was about to detonate. Others had figured it out and were desperately trying to override the system. It didn't matter. They were already too late. As Rourke and his team reached the hangar, they found Valka standing beside a Krell destroyer, a sleek, brutal-looking warship with weapons powerful enough to punch through planetary defenses. She leaned against the hull, chewing on a protein stick like she had all the time in the world. "Took you long enough," she said, tossing Rourke a data pad. "Ship's prepped. You're flying." "I thought you were the pilot," Rourke shot back. Valka smirked. "I steal ships, I don't fly 'em." Rourke groaned, but didn't argue. He wasn't thrilled about piloting a Krell vessel, but there was no time for hesitation. The team rushed aboard, slamming the hatch shut just as the first wave of Krell reinforcements stormed into the hangar. Rourke dropped into the pilot's chair and scanned the unfamiliar controls. "Kyle, I need you to translate—" "Already on it." Kyle's fingers flew over the interface, hacking into the Krell systems and forcing the ship into an emergency launch sequence. The engines roared to life, and the destroyer shot out of the hangar just as the Krell opened fire. The hull shuddered as plasma rounds slammed into the rear shields, but the ship held together. Outside, the battlefield was a storm of chaos. High Warlord Vesik's fleet loomed above, their weapons locking onto the escaping destroyer. Fighters scrambled toward them, and long-range cannons lit up the darkness of space. Then, Corthan Prime exploded. The detonation was blinding. The station's core ruptured, sending a shockwave across the system. The blast engulfed nearby Krell ships, ripping through their hulls like paper. The orbital defenses were obliterated, and fire consumed everything in its path. For a brief moment, the battlefield was silent. Then Rourke slammed the throttle forward. "Valka, get on the guns! Kale, find me a hyperspace route, now!" The ship twisted and weaved through the wreckage as debris rained around them. The Krell fleet, stunned by the unexpected destruction, hesitated just long enough for the stolen destroyer to break through their lines. Kyle cursed. "They're scrambling their hyperspace inhibitors. We've got a 10-second window before they block the jump." "Then hold on!" Rourke yanked the controls, pushing the ship to its limits. Krell fighters pursued them, plasma blasts grazing the hull. Valka's turrets roared in response, gunning down anything that got too close. The navigation system flashed green. Jumping. The destroyer vanished into hyperspace, just as the inhibitors activated, leaving the Krell fleet behind in the burning remains of Corthan Prime. For a moment the crew sat in stunned silence, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound. Then Valka let out a low whistle. "Well, that was dramatic." Kyle leaned back, exhaling. "We just crippled half the Krell war effort." Rourke rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping in. "Yeah, and now they're going to come after us with everything they have." But he wasn't afraid, because for the first time in history, humanity wasn't losing the war. They were winning. The stolen Krell destroyer hurtled through hyperspace, its engines pulsing with a steady hum. Rourke sat in the cockpit, staring at the swirling blue void outside the viewport. His body ached from the battle, but his mind refused to rest. They had won. Against all odds, they had destroyed Corthan Prime and crippled the Krell's war effort. But the war was far from over. Kyle's voice broke the silence. "We've got a problem." Rourke turned, already expecting bad news. "What now?" Kyle tapped a few commands into the terminal, pulling up a distorted transmission. The holographic feed flickered, showing a grainy image of a familiar face, General Arden Voss, one of the last surviving leaders of Earth's resistance. His face was bloodied, his uniform torn, but his eyes were still burning with defiance. "This is General Voss," the message began. "If anyone out there can hear me, Earth is—" The transmission cut out, replaced by static. Kyle swore under her breath. "That's all we got before the signal was jammed." Rourke clenched his fists. "He's alive." Valka leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Yeah, but for how long? If the Krell let that message slip through, it means they want us to know he's alive." "They're baiting us," Kyle added. "They know we'll come for him." Rourke knew they were right. The Krell weren't careless. They had left that transmission unencrypted for a reason. They wanted the Ghost Armada to charge into a trap. And they were right about one more thing. Rourke was going after him. He stood, his expression set. "Where was the signal coming from?" Kyle hesitated, then pulled up a star map. A red marker blinked ominously over a system deep in Krell-controlled space. "Draxus Prime, one of their high-security detention worlds." Valka let out a low whistle. "You mean the place where they keep the prisoners they don't plan on executing quickly? That's a full-scale fortress. We'd need an entire fleet to break in." Rourke's gaze didn't waver. "Then we'll get one." Silence filled the bridge. Kyle was the first to speak. "You're talking about uniting the resistance." "They won't trust us," Valka added. "Half the human colonies still think we're criminals. Some of them might even sell us out to the Krell to save their own skins." "They don't have a choice," Rourke said. His voice was cold, firm. "The Krell aren't just trying to rule us. They want to wipe us out. Earth is already a graveyard, and the rest of our people are scattered and broken. If we don't stand together now, we never will." Kale studied him, then nodded. "All right, let's say we rally what's left of humanity. Where do we start?" Rourke pulled up the star map, zooming in on a remote sector filled with asteroid belts and abandoned outposts. "The Bastion Rim," he said. Valka raised an eyebrow. "You want to go to the most lawless part of the galaxy?" Rourke smirked. "That's where the best fighters are." Kyle sighed. "So, let me get this straight. Your plan is to find the most dangerous, untrustworthy, violent people in the galaxy and convince them to fight with us instead of against us?" "That's the plan." Valka grinned. "I like it." Kyle groaned. "This is going to be a disaster." Rourke didn't argue. It was a reckless plan. It would take every ounce of diplomacy, intimidation, and sheer luck to convince the warlords, mercenaries, and exiles of the Bastion Rim to unite under a single banner. But if they pulled it off, the Krell wouldn't be facing just another rebellion. They'd be facing humanity's worst nightmares. Rourke turned back to the controls, setting their course. "Buckle up. We're about to start a war." The Bastion Rim was a place even the Krell didn't dare control. It was a chaotic expanse of lawless planets, asteroid belts filled with hidden outposts, and space stations that served as havens for smugglers, warlords, and exiled factions. If there was a place to recruit an army of the most dangerous, unpredictable, and battle-hardened humans left in the galaxy, this was it. Rourke had been here before, years ago, back when he had first fled Earth. He knew the players, the factions, the grudges that ran deep between them. Getting them to work together would be damn near impossible. But impossible was something humanity had been proving wrong ever since the Krell arrived. The stolen destroyer emerged from hyperspace near Kalor's Drift, a station built into the remains of a shattered moon. It was one of the few neutral hubs in the Rim. No official government, no laws, just a loose understanding that whoever shot first better be prepared to die second. As the ship docked, Rourke turned to his crew. "We split up," he ordered. "Kale, you're with me. We'll reach out to the old merc groups, see who still has a grudge against the Krell. Valka, you work the underworld contacts. If anyone's been selling weapons or tech to the Krell, I want to know." Valka smirked. "You want me to shake down some arms dealers? You really know how to make a girl happy." Rourke ignored her and turned to the rest of the crew. "No one goes anywhere alone? The rim is a graveyard for the reckless." They stepped off the ship into a world of neon lights, the stench of unwashed bodies, and the ever-present hum of violence waiting to explode. Kaelor's drift was packed with exiles from 100 worlds, humans, rogue aliens, genetically modified soldiers, and AI constructs pretending to be people. As they moved through the station, Rourke felt the weight of old ghosts pressing against him. It wasn't long before those ghosts made themselves known. A heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder. Instinct took over. Rourke spun, drawing his pistol and pressing it under the chin of a grizzled, scarred man. The man barely flinched, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Well, well," the stranger rumbled. "Look what the void spit back out." Rourke lowered his weapon, but only slightly. Torrin Kane. Kane was an ex-general, one of Earth's finest before the world collapsed. He had commanded legions once, but after a disastrous last stand against the Krell, he had vanished. Rumors said he had turned warlord, running his own empire out in the Rim. "Never thought I'd see you again," Kane said. His grin didn't fade, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "I heard you were dead. Then I heard you were leading some kind of rebellion. And now here you are, walking into my backyard." "I need an army," Rourke said. He never was one for small talk. "You've got one." Kane's grin widened. "And why would I hand over my forces to you?" Rourke met his gaze. "Because we both know what the Krell are doing. They won't stop at Earth. They'll come for every human out here too. You think hiding in the Rim will save you? The Dominion will burn this place to the ground the moment they're done with the rest of us." Kane was silent for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. "You always did know how to make a speech." He leaned closer. "All right, Rourke. You want my army? Then you fight for it." Rourke's jaw tightened. "You want me in a pit fight?" Kane shrugged. "Not just you. If you want my army, you fight my best warriors. You win. We talk." Coyle swore under her breath. "This is a waste of time." Rourke didn't flinch. He knew how things worked in the Rim. You didn't convince men like Kane with words. You convinced them with blood. He cracked his knuckles and stepped forward. "Fine. Let's get this over with." Kane laughed. "Now that's the Rourke I remember." The fight was about to begin. The underground fighting pit was carved into the heart of Kaelor's drift, a deep, circular chamber lined with jagged metal and rusted beams. The crowd pressed in from every angle, their shouts and cheers reverberating through the space like a living beast hungry for blood. Rourke stood in the center of the pit, rolling his shoulders, his muscles tight with anticipation. The rules were simple: win or die. Kane leaned against the railing above, smirking down at him. "Hope you haven't gone soft, Rourke. My fighters don't pull punches." Rourke smirked back. "Neither do I." The gates slammed open, and his first opponent stepped into the pit. A mountain of a man, Krevak the Bonebreaker, a former shock trooper who had earned his name by snapping the spines of his enemies with his bare hands. His skin was covered in scars, his cybernetic arm humming with energy. The crowd roared. Bets were placed. Then the fight began. Krevak lunged, his massive fist swinging like a hammer. Rourke barely dodged, feeling the air tremble from the force of the strike. He countered with a sharp blow to the ribs, but Krevak barely reacted. The giant grinned and grabbed Rourke by the throat. Pain exploded in his body as Krevak slammed him into the ground. The crowd erupted. Blood stained the floor. Rourke gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus. Krevak was stronger. That meant nothing. Strength could be outmaneuvered. As Krevak lifted him for another slam, Rourke twisted, shifting his weight, locking his legs around the giant's arm. A second later, Kravak's cybernetic limb was in the wrong position, and Rourke snapped it at the joint. Kravak roared in agony, stumbling back. Rourke didn't waste the moment. He leapt forward, his fists striking with brutal precision, one to the throat, two to the jaw, and the final blow to the temple. Kravak collapsed. Silence. Then the crowd exploded. Kane let out a whistle from above. Not bad, but we're not done. The gates opened again. Two opponents this time. A knife-wielding assassin with enhanced reflexes and a hulking brute with titanium-plated fists. Rourke exhaled. His knuckles ached, his ribs burned, but he ignored it. Pain was temporary. He clenched his fists. Come on, then. The second fight began. The assassin struck first, a blur of silver as the blade flashed toward his throat. Rourke ducked, but the brute was already swinging, a wrecking ball of a punch aimed for his head. He twisted, barely avoiding it, but the assassin's knife grazed his arm, drawing blood. He was fast, but they were faster. Rourke had no choice but to fight dirty. He grabbed a handful of sand from the pit floor and flung it into the assassin's eyes. The man recoiled, cursing, and in that split second, Rourke spun, slamming his elbow into the brute's throat before driving his knee into his ribs. The brute staggered, but didn't go down. The assassin recovered, lunging blindly with his blade, but Rourke caught his wrist, twisting it until he heard the sickening snap of bone. The knife fell. Rourke caught it and drove it into the brute's leg. The massive fighter bellowed in pain, dropping to one knee. Rourke didn't give him a chance to recover. He drove his fist into the man's jaw with every ounce of strength he had left. The brute fell. The assassin, writhing in pain, surrendered. The crowd lost their minds. Rourke stood in the center of the pit, breathing hard, blood dripping from his wounds, but still standing. Kane watched from above, his smirk widening. Well, he said, amused. Looks like you're still the same bastard I remember. Rourke wiped the blood from his mouth. Do I have my army? Kane chuckled. You've got your damn army. The deal was made. The war was about to change. Kane's forces weren't just a ragtag group of mercenaries. They were hardened warriors, ex-soldiers, bounty hunters, cybernetic killers, and ruthless smugglers who had survived in the lawless Bastion Rim for years. If there was any group in the galaxy that could strike fear into the Krell, it was them. Rourke stood on a makeshift command platform aboard Kane's flagship, the Iron Fang, as hundreds of battle-hardened fighters gathered before him. Their eyes were cold, their faces marked by years of war and struggle. These weren't idealists. They weren't fighting for Earth, or honor, or vengeance. They were fighting because war was all they knew. Rourke scanned the crowd, then spoke. I won't waste time with speeches, he said. You all know why we're here. The Krell took Earth. They took our people. And now they think they've won. He let the words sink in before stepping forward. But we're still here. We're still breathing. And we're going to show the Krell exactly what kind of mistake they made. Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathered warriors. Kane stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching carefully. This was his army, and though he had agreed to fight, Rourke knew he still had to prove himself as their leader. Kyle activated the holomap, displaying Draxus Prime, the high-security Krell prison world where General Voss was being held. The planet was a fortress, with orbital defense platforms, automated gun turrets, and legions of Krell soldiers guarding its prisoners. Breaking in wasn't just difficult, it was suicide. Valka studied the map, whistling. I count at least 3 separate kill zones. That's not even counting the planetary defense grid. Kane chuckled. Looks like you finally picked a fight worth dying for, Rourke. Rourke ignored him and turned to Kale. Tell me you've got something. Kale smirked. I always do. She brought up another projection, a hidden access point deep within the prison facility. The Krell have gotten arrogant, she said. They think no one would be stupid enough to try an infiltration, so they've left a small security gap, a ventilation tunnel large enough for a small strike team to enter undetected. If we get inside, we can disable the planetary defense grid from within. Kane raised an eyebrow. And the fleet? You expect my ships to just sit pretty while you sneak in? Rourke shook his head. Number your fleet as our distraction. Silence. Then Kane laughed. I like it. You sneak in and cripple the defenses while we keep the Krell busy. Risky as hell, but it just might work. Kale folded her arms. Only problem is, once we disable the defenses, we still have to get out. That was the part Rourke hadn't quite figured out yet. But he wasn't going to show doubt. We'll figure that out once we're inside, he said. We hit fast, break Voss out, and get the hell out before the Krell can react. Kane's soldiers exchanged looks. Some grinned, others looked skeptical, but no one backed down. Because this was what they lived for. Rourke looked over the faces of the people he had just recruited. He had won them over in the pit, but now they were about to walk into the most dangerous mission of their lives. Anyone who doesn't want in, speak now, he said. No one moved. Kane grinned. Looks like you've got your war, Rourke. Rourke exhaled. This was it. The moment they turned the tide of the war. Because once they broke into Draxus Prime and rescued Voss, the Krell wouldn't just be fighting a rebellion. They'd be fighting an uprising. And this time, humanity wasn't playing by the rules. The fleet emerged from hyperspace like a phantom in the void. Kane's warships, fast, heavily modified, and completely unpredictable, held formation just beyond the Krell's sensor range. The Iron Fang, a heavily armed battlecruiser, sat at the center of the ragtag armada, its dark hull blending into the backdrop of space. On board the stolen Krell destroyer, Rourke stood with his strike team in the drop bay, tightening the straps of his combat gear. Beside him, Kale checked her hacking tools while Valka spun a stolen Krell blade between her fingers, clearly enjoying the anticipation of the fight ahead. All right, Rourke said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his gut. This is it. Kale brought up the holomap of Draxus Prime. The planet was a fortress, its atmosphere choked with ion storms, and its surface scarred from past wars. Towering prison structures jutted from the ground like jagged spikes, surrounded by thick walls and endless patrols. This place wasn't built for escapes, Kyle muttered. Rourke nodded. Good thing we aren't escaping. We're breaking in. From the bridge, Kane's voice crackled over the comms. Hope you're ready, Rourke, because we're about to wake the Krell up in the worst way possible. Rourke smirked. Do it. Outside, hell descended. Kane's fleet opened fire. A storm of missiles and plasma rounds slammed into Draxus Prime's orbital defenses, lighting up the darkness like wildfire. The Krell weren't caught entirely off guard, but they hadn't expected an all-out assault. Alarm klaxons shrieked across the system as Krell warships scrambled to respond. The sky burned. And while the Krell rushed to meet the full force of Kane's fleet, no one noticed the stolen destroyer slipping through the chaos. Rourke's strike team descended in silence, their dropship punching through the atmosphere, navigating the violent ion storms with expert precision. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating the massive prison below. 5 seconds to landing, Kale called. Rourke gripped the overhead bar, his stomach tightening as the dropship plunged toward the surface. The hidden ventilation shaft was barely large enough to accommodate the ship, and the pilot had to fight against brutal winds and security sensors to line up the approach. Then, boom! A Krell missile struck near their landing zone, sending a shockwave through the ship. Warnings flashed red. We're hit, the pilot shouted. Hold it together, Rourke barked. Get us down. With a final burst of thrusters, the ship slammed into the landing zone, skidding across the metal platform. The rear hatch hissed open, and the team moved like lightning. "We're in," Rourke said into his comm. "Proceeding with infiltration." Kane's voice came back through static. "Better hurry, the Krell are pissed." Inside the prison, chaos was already brewing. The Krell had noticed the battle above, and their security forces were shifting. Patrols moved toward the outer defenses, leaving the ventilation shafts vulnerable, just as Kale had predicted. The team slipped inside, moving in absolute silence. Dim red emergency lights flickered as they navigated the industrial tunnels, the hum of machinery masking their footsteps. Kyle worked fast, hacking into the security network. "All right," she whispered. "Voss is in cell block Theta 9. We need to move, now." They moved fast and brutal. The first Krell patrol never even saw them coming. Valka took one out with a knife to the throat, while Rourke shot the second through the skull with his silenced pistol. The next squad wasn't as easy. The moment they stepped into the main corridor, a Krell officer turned, his eyes widening in recognition before he roared an alarm. The prison erupted into gunfire. Red lights flashed. Sirens screamed. They had 3 minutes before the whole prison locked down. "Go!" Rourke shouted. They sprinted down the corridor as Krell soldiers poured in from both sides. Valka's twin pistols spat fire, dropping enemies with pinpoint accuracy. Kyle threw an EMP charge ahead, knocking out a security turret just as it locked onto them. They reached Theta 9. Kyle rushed to the panel, overriding the security locks. Sparks flew as the door groaned open, revealing General Voss. The old soldier was battered, bruised, and covered in dried blood, but his eyes still burned with fury. He looked at Rourke and grinned. "Took you long enough." "Shut up and move!" Rourke snapped, tossing him a weapon. Voss caught it and cocked the rifle without hesitation. "Let's kill some of these bastards." They turned, just as a Krell warlord stepped into the corridor. The towering alien was clad in reinforced battle armor, plasma blades igniting on both arms. His voice was a guttural growl of rage and triumph. "You will not leave this place alive, human." Rourke tightened his grip on his rifle. "Let's find out." The final battle for Draxus Prime had begun. The Krell warlord charged. Rourke barely had time to react before plasma blades slashed through the air, searing the metal walls where he had stood a second earlier. The heat from the attack stung his face as he dodged, rolling aside and raising his rifle. He fired, but the warlord's armor absorbed the shots, barely slowing him down. Valka's twin pistols barked, sending rounds into the warlord's joints, but he powered through, knocking her aside with a brutal backhand. She slammed into the wall, groaning in pain. "Not working," Kale growled. "That armor's too thick." The warlord lunged for Rourke again, plasma blades aimed straight for his chest. Then, boom! A sniper round slammed into the warlord's shoulder, staggering him. General Voss stood behind them, smirking, rifle smoking from the shot. "Looks like I still got it." Rourke didn't waste the moment. He surged forward, pulling a thermal charge from his belt and slamming it onto the warlord's chest plate. The Krell's glowing eyes widened in fury as he realized what had happened. Rourke kicked him back. "Enjoy hell." The thermal charge detonated, blasting through the armor and ripping the warlord apart in a fiery explosion. The shockwave shook the corridor, sending smoke and shrapnel flying. Silence followed. Then Kale exhaled. "Damn, that was satisfying." "No time to celebrate," Rourke said, reloading. "We need to get the hell out of here." The prison's full security force was closing in. Krell reinforcements flooded the halls, gunfire raining down from every angle. The strike team pushed forward, gunning down enemy after enemy as they carved a path to the extraction point. Kyle hacked into the security system, forcing open the last set of blast doors. Valka tossed a grenade behind them, sending a wave of fire into the Krell's advancing forces. They burst onto the landing platform, just as Kane's fleet arrived. Above them, the sky was on fire. Krell warships were burning, their defenses crumbling under the relentless assault from Kane's mercenary fleet. Explosions rippled across the surface, sending plumes of smoke into the atmosphere. And then, the Iron Fang dropped out of the clouds, its massive cannons roaring as it leveled the prison's defenses. "Your ride's here, Rourke," Kane's voice crackled through the comms. "Don't keep me waiting." The stolen Krell dropship swooped down, side doors opening as a gunner covered their escape. One by one, they jumped aboard, Kyle dragging Voss up just as Krell soldiers swarmed the platform. Rourke was the last to board. He turned, looking at the burning prison below. Thousands of human prisoners were rising up, taking advantage of the chaos to turn their weapons against their captors. The Krell were losing control. He smirked. Then he leapt onto the ship as it lifted off, engines screaming as they blasted into the sky. They had done it. They had broken Draxus Prime. The stolen destroyer jumped to hyperspace, carrying them to safety as Kane's fleet made their final retreat. With General Voss freed, the human resistance had a real leader again. With Kane's forces joining the fight, humanity now had an army. The Krell were no longer hunting a dying species. They were facing a rebellion. A war they thought was already won had just begun anew. Rourke stood on the bridge, watching the stars streak past. He had been called a traitor once, exiled and discarded. Now? Now he was leading humanity's last stand. And this time, they would not fall.